Save the Semantics, episode 272. It is September 9th, 2024. My name is Myro. This is the podcast where I ramble on for a bit about some shit. It has been, unfortunately, a pretty uneventful weekend, at least in terms of what I would prefer to talk about. But let's just get into speculation. Let's just be a total, let's just be a speculator. Let's just have some unhinged predictions of what might come. I was sort of last week. I was sort of feeling, that we got a lot of things kind of up in the works, which we did, right? And technically that is the case. It just feels like a very slow Monday following all of those things that have sort of occurred last week, you know what I mean? It just happens sometimes. And the thing that I think I recognize this probably just like right now is that, I was making fun of people that were like, we want Switch 2 news now, like throwing tantrums about it. I think I look at those people and I say, you know what, you and I, we're not so different after all. Because I feel the same way. I think I'm starting to feel that a little bit. And I know it hasn't been that much time, but in all honesty, my goodness, I cannot talk today. The feelings I have for it have been just sort of continuing for a while now. I've been wanting to have some additional things come out about a successor, really since last year, right? As I noted before. So, I think, listen, can I feel a little justified in a feeling like maybe we should have some things come out about successor news? Wouldn't that be kind of nice to have just a little bit? I know patience is key and everything like that, and don't be so hasty. I watched Two Towers this weekend with some friends. They did a re-showing of it, the extended version of it this weekend. So the end, the don't be too hasty. And I get it. I know maybe I am being a little hasty. Maybe I am being a little impatient, but look, it would be nice to hear a little something, so that I can I have something to sort of go off of, you know what I mean? So you know what? I made fun of those people that are like, we want the news right now. I am very much in that ballpark right now. I am. And I was just kind of kidding myself. I was sort of projecting in some instances. Anyways, I just think that it would be, I think the expectation, or rather the continuous speculation about when a reveal will be made is sort of, it's rumored to be within either this week or next week. I am not putting anything on it being this week, really. I just don't feel like there's been enough. I feel like there would be more things coming out about that than what we've heard, which is really nothing on at least Nintendo's front, right? So I feel this week we're probably not going to get anything. And then on top of that, and I know this is less significant in some instances, but PlayStation, Sony, they said that they're going to have some kind of conference tomorrow for the PlayStation 5 Pro, which I think maybe for some Sony, some PlayStation fans that might be kind of exciting. I think that it is sort of, I don't know, it is less of like a hardware upgrade, I feel, and more so just like another expensive, another expensive kind of version, a more expensive version of what you currently own, which is already pretty expensive in its own right, which, Japan has increased the price of the base model PS5, and now you're going to release a brand new model. It's like, ooh, I do wonder how well that's going to sell with just currently how expensive things are, and how just these markups and prices, I think, can heavily detract people from purchasing your already incredibly expensive toy, right? It's like, on top of it being 500, it's gonna be like, I'm gonna guess that it's probably gonna be at least more than $600 for a PlayStation Pro, and it's like, at that point, is it worth it? I don't want to be in the camp of someone who is like, the PS5 doesn't have games, and I've kind of joked about that a little bit, even though I kind of mean it. But really, though, if you think about it, and I've made sort of, I kind of go back and forth in terms of that argument. It's like, no, there are some really good games for sure. There are some really good stuff out there, but I don't know. It's just sort of hard to say, in terms of like what is available, and like what is, maybe like considered to be, you could sort of represent on the system. But like, I don't know, it's sort of limited, I think, in terms of what you can actually have and use to be like available. I think it's a little difficult to say like whether it's like worthwhile in the long run to like make that purchase. It's like, you kind of do like maybe your own sort of like cost benefit analysis in a lot of ways, where it's like, okay, because in a lot of ways it is like a full on investment, you know what I mean? It's like you're investing in a whole ass new thing. Like for certain people who do like constant upgrades of your like iPhones and that kind of thing, it might not be like super substantial, but for just like people, like normal people with like, just like regular just like, who aren't as, tech, like interested in tech, it's like, it's just hard to justify making that purchase, you know what I mean? I would never be someone who buys the new iPhone on release every year. And plus, it's $1,000, which is crazy to think. And, so, again, I don't want to like shame people, because I know people that, finance their phones and stuff like that. And it's like, all right, if you're able to do that, that's fine. And if you think it's worthwhile in the long run, and if you feel it's worth investing in a new phone and whatever, that's fine. But in the case of like a PlayStation, it's like, look at like what you're actually purchasing. Are you getting it just so you can say that you have it? I mean, that's fine. Some people have, some people like to collect consoles and that kind of thing, and that's cool and all. But I'm looking at kind of the decisions that are being made, and obviously I'm not an exec or anything like that. I always feel like I have to give the disclaimer, because the decisions that you make at the top can be substantial, whatever. But just looking at the current landscape of things, the cost of everything, it is just not worth it, in my opinion, to get a brand new system, which is really like, how different is going to be. I'm going to watch, I might check out the presentation later, like maybe after it airs or something, just because I'm curious. But how much of a change is it going to be from the base model to what it is? And is it even worthwhile in that sense to go through that process of buying a whole new system, right? Does it also incentivize new people, like new users going into your system, right? Like, is it good enough to where someone like me, who doesn't have a PlayStation, who really doesn't have a ton of interest in it, because I feel that, I mean, one, just time and money and everything like that. But putting that to the side, is it worthwhile to get the newest brand of the console just so it could be the most, just so I could play the games at the highest fidelity, right? Is it worthwhile in that sense? I think, for some people that do have that interest of, buying, just buying new consoles and just, having the newest hardware and that kind of thing, it's like they're going to get it regardless, but that's like a pretty small number of people, I think. Like that's not that many people who are really that invested in, trying to get the newest console all the time. Like I just, those people, either they're, quote unquote, like career hobbyists who are super into that thing, or people who have like expendable income. It's just not that like wide range of a consumer base. So I don't know. I just thinking about that makes me wonder if it's like, just thinking it from like a business standpoint is like, is it worthwhile to even go through that? Maybe just to scrounge up interest again in PlayStation, and maybe on top of, maybe releasing like a pretty critically acclaimed game, like highly critically acclaimed game. Is it like, I don't know, is it maybe does it kind of coincide with that? Were they already kind of planning on making this statement? I think that might be the case. But I don't know. It's sort of, it's like interesting because like this whole like, quote unquote console generation has felt, it really has felt like not like such a non-generation of sorts, because if you look at, past eras of consoles, whether it's, kind of like the PlayStation 1 N64 era, and Xbox, that kind of era. I guess it would be more like Xbox, GameCube, PlayStation 2, and then Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and Wii. Like those are very, and then I guess the next era after that, it would be, Xbox One and PlayStation 4. And then kind of afterwards, it starts to get a little bit muddied because you're like, where exactly does the Switch kind of fit into it? Does it fit more with the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series era, or more so with kind of the, PS4, Xbox One? It's a little difficult to make the distinction now. And it just sort of, with it currently, it's like, it feels almost, and I think I heard I've heard conversations being made and comments being made in, some podcasts about how it almost feels like kind of this like lost era of sorts, where you sort of struggle to find like a defining game of this generation. You know what I mean? It's a little hard to say. I guess you could look, it's like, I'm trying to think like maybe like God of War is probably one series, and Spider-Man in terms of like, on the PlayStation front. It's some of the releases with like Elden Ring and that sort of thing. And while those are, I haven't played any of them, but while those are most likely very exceptional games, it's hard for me to be like, okay, this is like, these are great, but are these like indicative of the highest, caliber of quality in terms of graphics and performance and all those sort of things? Like, is it really kind of reflective of that? And I don't know if I would say so. It's like you don't really, I don't know, because when you look at those games, you don't necessarily think of it being, these crazy, well performing games, even if they are, but it's like you don't like, that's not the first thing you think of, at least in my perspective, right? I think, with like Elden Ring, there's so many other things that you would consider before you even get to the graphical aspect of it, which does look really good. But I just don't think that's like the thing you think of when it comes to, I don't know, Souls games. So it's like, I don't know. And I know, I think, it is coming from my perspective, who is a little biased in terms of, not really caring too much about the graphics or whatever. I do care to some extent. I think that I have been turned off by certain games that have performed, that have performed poorly on the Switch. I mean, I can think of a few examples where I've been like, I'm probably going to pass on this. East 9 is one of those, where it just does not look like it runs well at all on the Switch. It just doesn't look good. East 8 I love, but I would argue that it still doesn't look very good. It looks like a PlayStation 2 game on the Switch. So I understand kind of, you know, kind of going into the Switch 2 conversation. I understand the want to have updated graphics and everything like that, and updated hardware, so you can have games with better performance, and I totally understand that. I think it's fair to want that for sure, but to get to like the highest level of performance, it's like how high can you fly before it's even, before you start kind of careening back down into the ground? Like how much is it worth it to get to that level, and to even like see that as like a, as a gamer? Like, do you really care too much about that? And is it worthwhile to get that type of performance based on the cost of the newest model of your console? I don't know. It's kind of, there's a lot of things to think about. And I've consistently been someone who really, I just care about playing the games, you know what I mean? And while I may have sort of been left out of some of the games from this generation, including things like Elden Ring and God of War and that kind of thing, I'm okay with that because I still have so many other games that I have that I have left to play. So it just is, I don't know. There are more experiences outside of the ones where you do have the best performing games, and I think it's worth thinking about, like, whether if you are sort of looking for something where you get the craziest, like, oh my god, realistic graphics and that kind of thing, it's like, how much are you willing to give up just to get kind of, sort of these, little experiences here and there? Because it's not going to be, it's like, not all of these games are going to be, crazy fidelity. It's not going to be, insane levels of quality all the time. You're only going to get a few of those, like, maybe even like in a couple of years. Like, you get one of those a year, potentially. So it's kind of like, I don't know. I think, yeah, I know this is really sounding like I am kind of on the side of, does the PlayStation have any games? But I just think it's worth thinking about, because it's like, yeah, sure, you do have, there are a lot of quality games on there, but is the initial cost of buying a PlayStation 5 in general worth it overall in the long term? I don't know. It's I don't want to, I also don't really want to think of it as too much as like a return, quote unquote, return on investment, because I think that's stupid. Like, entertainment is not supposed to be like that. And I know I've been throwing around investment a lot, but there is like a lot of cost associated with it that I think is worth thinking of. Anyways, that is all to say, I am still interested in seeing what Sony says, and what they kind of provide in their presentation tomorrow, because I just am kind of curious, and recently I've just been a bit more attuned and a bit more interested in what kind of goes across the industry overall. And seeing what kind of impact this has across the board, seeing, just kind of gauging the interest of people. I could be completely wrong. I think it's possible that this might generate way more appeal than I sort of maybe just thought. So it's entirely possible they might completely prove me wrong on that front, where fans might actually be interested in getting a brand new system, brand new kind of updated model for the current system. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. We will see how that goes. So following last Friday, I believe, with the release of Astrobot, as I mentioned, the reviews have been really like spectacular. It's sort of kind of in the front running for Game of the Year now. And I've watched some footage of it. I did watch some streamers play it this weekend, and it does look like a lot of fun. I would consider myself maybe a little jealous, and if I do eventually, if I do eventually pick up a PlayStation, I'm sure that would be one of the first games that I would want to play. And just sort of continuing what I was, kind of thinking about from last week. The hope is that this game does sell well. I think that is sort of like a common consensus, this sort of common want as people who are a part of kind of the gaming community, if you want to call it that, that really want to see this game succeed, just because I think it kind of hits on a lot of fronts. In terms of obviously the gameplay, the mechanics, the artistic decisions, just the overall quality of it. And the fun that it appears to really bring to the table. I think that just the whole package has resonated with a lot of players, and myself, even though I don't have the game currently, I think it would be really nice to see this game be successful, and have just give people who may not be super into the colorful, typical colorful platformers like Mario, or I don't know, usually just kind of in the Mario variety, and see that other franchises and other IPs can be made possible. And I think that having more just more flavor, I think is good. Obviously I've talked the games that I personally really, connect with, the games that I consider my favorites, are ones that are more story driven and have more of ongoing plot and with characters and that kind of thing. But I that does not mean that I do not appreciate these other types of games like Astrobot, where the sole kind of purpose is really just to kind of have fun with it, just to really be a game of a game, right? So I think it's just it's good to have the medium provide these types of just varieties in terms of types of games. Just on kind of the on the Sony side of things, Sony is pretty well known, at least recently, in terms of their first person experience games, whether it's like with Horizon or Last of Us and God of War, and the kind of their exclusive titles. And I think that those games, I think if I were able to play them, I think it would sort of resonate with me, and I think I'm sure that I would enjoy playing through them. But I think that having a bit more of just like a bit more color, I think would be good too. Not just these sort of like huge cinematic games. And I do enjoy those. I played through Final Fantasy X this year, and I loved it, and I'm sure that I would love these games as well. But I do think that having just different things is good. I think just having just variety is the spice of life, right? So just having that kind of as a part of your kind of intake, I think is good, is beneficial, just so you can figure out things that you may not have liked before, and I think it's worthwhile to try different things, even if they may not be your thing. You find out it might not be your thing, but it's worth just checking out and trying out and seeing if if it works for you. And I think that with Astrobot, it is much more in the sense that it has kind of universal acclaim and universal appeal. You got a cute robot as kind of the main character. You got a bunch of other cute robots, and they dress up as different characters from different franchises. It's good. It's just fun to see all that, and it's really I've enjoyed watching people play it as well. So it's nice to kind of see sort of this connectivity across the board. Even for myself who just doesn't have the game. So it's cool to, it's cool, and I hope that this success sustains and possibly results in there being more games kind of this style and from the Astrobot IP. I think that would be really cool to see. Anyways, it'll be funny that after I record this, some other thing pops up, some other news pops up, but we'll see. Maybe tomorrow there might be some additional things, or maybe this week. We'll see, depending on how I feel and how much time I have. I may, maybe I'll do another 3-parter. I don't know. We'll see. I think, like last week I was just feeling, like talking a bit more about things, just depending on kind of my energy and whatnot. We'll see what I have in the reserve, but yeah, for now, I'll save any further conversation for later this week. Alrighty, it is Friday, September 13th. Recording this on a Friday afternoon / evening. It has been a very long week for me, a very long week, and I am looking forward to this weekend. I think I'll have a little bit of a break in between, so I'm looking forward to it. It should be nice. It's Friday the 13th too, by the way. It's kind of funny, I do wonder. I could just look it up, but sometimes I just like to, ponder things and then just let that remain the idea that I have of the thing, and not to go further into it. But I do wonder if the film and the movies kind of made the coined the term Friday the 13th as sort of this, cursed or sort of scary day. I know that the number 13 is associated with, the devil and that kind of thing, but was it after the film came out in the 90s? No, sorry, 80s, 70s, the original film, that it became sort of associated with a more popular term. Is that kind of where that came about? I'm not sure. Because it's a similar thing with Groundhog Day, because Groundhog Day is not, you don't associate Groundhog Day with really anything special. It's like the film kind of made that term. It's like, oh, you're having kind of a Groundhog Day sort of thing. You know what I mean? Where certain films essentially change the idea of what a day really means, when Groundhog Day was nothing special to begin with. Maybe it is special for the specific places that still celebrate it in some ways, but I think it is, you have kind of these popular films and other popular media that kind of recontextualizes what certain days and certain, events mean into something else entirely. Because before the films, I'm assuming Friday the 13th was just kind of maybe just a day. And then the films, they kind of added that. They attached like an additional meaning to the day. Maybe some people in maybe kind of religious parts, sects, whether it's within Christianity or something, maybe they already looked at Friday the 13th as maybe as a possible day of reckoning or something like that. I don't know. Am I just completely misinformed? Has it been a thing for a very long time, and am I just completely ignorant of that. Maybe I'll do a little research, honestly. Maybe I will. Anyways, my brain is mush. However, I do have some things that I do want to talk about. I want to talk some more Zelda stuff because we are kind of reaching we're reaching the release of Echoes of Wisdom. And with this release kind of coming, it's made me think about it's been a little more than a year since Tears of the Kingdom was released, and I've done, obviously I talked about the game in length when I initially played it last year, and I talked about it again about maybe like 6 months or so, talking about kind of how the consensus about the game sort of shifted a decent amount after people have had, a decent amount of time with the game and have time to kind of process the story and kind of the connection or lack of connection it has to the rest of the series. And I think it's worth it to sort of look back again, after kind of a year in passing, because it was like it was a massive game last year, and kind of leading up to that point, it was the most anticipated game that I had in a very long time. I guess outside of like Xenoblade 3 and blah 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 blah, but it had been a while since a game really was like, oh shit, this is gonna be something, right? It felt like that it was the first time in a while for me where I was kind of part of the hype cycle. And I've talked about the hype cycle kind of recently in regards to the Switch 2 release and sort of following along with that. But that I really felt I was kind of a part of something, and it was pretty exciting. Leading up to the release, being in a sense, being a part of the discussions with the trailer releases and people theorizing what's going to happen within the game and that sort of thing. And it was really exciting. And, I think that I'm still in kind of the camp where there seems to be like a pretty sort of kind of a divide among fans. Like they're like clearly right now there is a more defined divide between certain types of fans, and I think it would be kind of interesting to kind of delve into that. When I work and stuff, I'll listen to music, I'll listen to podcasts, or I'll listen to like YouTube videos that do kind of lengthier discussions about stuff. There's this one video that popped up on my recommended. It was posted a little while back, but I was just kind of like, I was a little bit like put off. One, by the length of the video. It was like 3 hours long. It was one of those. And then also the title was pretty provocative, right? Essentially it was, I hate Tears of the Kingdom. Very just straight to the point, but also potentially maybe a little, again, it's pretty provocative. So I was kind of like, okay, this feels like it might be a bit much, but I was, when I do work, I'm like, I feel like I kind of need something to sort of listen to kind of stimulate and get through the day or whatever. And it was kind of like a nice pairing for me just to listen to it and work at the same time. And so I was listening, to the video, and I think that they made 3 hours. They're going to make a lot of points. A lot of them, I think, were, I will say, I think a lot of the points made were very nitpicky, but that just kind of comes with the territory of being a 3 hour long video. And the fact that if you already dislike something, the issues are going to become much more apparent to you. And so you're going to stick on to them, and they're going to stick out to you, like a sore thumb. So it's like you sort of, you're going to tend to hyperfixate on things when you dislike those things a little bit more. And the issue, the kind of the smaller issues that did pop up, they did not personally bother me while I was playing. I didn't really feel that it sort of detracted from my experience of playing Tears of the Kingdom. So, people's mileage will vary depending on kind of what they're, what they can tolerate in terms of game design or gameplay and that kind of thing. For this person, there was, I think, just the overall experience. I think the bigger pieces, which include kind of the story and certain parts of the gameplay, I think those really probably, I think those were sort of enough for them to further recognize other things that they disliked about the game. You know what I mean? It started off kind of as you take a big picture look at it, you see kind of the larger errors in sight, and then you decide to kind of further analyze and see what other issues kind of popped up with the game. I don't think that I will be revisiting both either Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom in a very long time. I think that I've sort of had my fill with those worlds for the time being. I've done what I've kind of wanted to do. I've explored Hyrule and re-explored it again twice in Breath of the Wild, and then this additional time in Tears of the Kingdom. And so I think I've had my experience with it for the time being. I'll probably revisit it later down the line just to see kind of, how I feel about it and that kind of thing. It's one of those things. It's like, I think that initial playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom, I was satisfied by. I was satisfied to where I didn't feel like I had to do anything else in the game. And I think for some people, including the person who made the video, I think they were probably seeking more things from it, obviously. And despite sort of the quantity of content that was available, it wasn't enough to kind of satisfy their preferences and their wants and that kind of thing. I think there were a lot of things for them that were lacking, especially when it comes to the story. I can definitely agree with some of their points regarding how the story was handled. I didn't get into too much of my personal issues with it when I talked about it last year, because I mostly I was kind of just enamored by the experience overall, and I wasn't bothered enough by those things to point out these issues and really just see oh, this is like a problem for me. Oh, this is like another problem for me. And it kind of is like taking away my enjoyment of it. I think if you do look at it with a bit more of a clear focus on the story and everything, I think there are definitely clearly a lot of issues available, and a lot of issues that you can kind of pinpoint and stuff. But I really feel that despite the things that do pop up, and despite the things that upon revisiting, upon re-looking at it kind of with sort of in hindsight, I think that I can still appreciate the things that the game brought to the table, you know what I mean? And that isn't to say that I still don't agree with the points that were presented in that kind of lengthy video, but I really just am not, it wasn't enough for me to dislike the experience, you know what I mean? It's a really interesting spot to be in, because I said this before, even before the game came out, I kind of mentioned that for me personally, the story in the games are not really kind of the thing that draws me in. It is definitely part of it, for sure. It is definitely part of the entire package for Zelda, but it wasn't something that I engaged with it too deeply. But I do think that there are aspects of it that you can kind of draw from, whether it's like the personal development of the characters, whether it's, the connections that, you as the player have with Link and his sort of adventure and that kind of thing, the hero's adventure and whatnot. It is all, the story in itself is all pretty standard, but I think what makes it great is this kind of real sense of adventure that you have when you kind of embark and go through any of the Zelda games, really. So that isn't to, I don't want to diminish the story of the games by any means. I think there are instances where there are some really great story beats in any of the Zelda games. And I think that, one of my favorite games in the series is Twilight Princess. And that happens to have a pretty great story. So I think that it sounds like maybe I'm contradicting myself a little bit, but it's not like, I don't go into Zelda to expect something of like a great narrative per se. But that doesn't, that doesn't take away from the fact that I can still appreciate moments within the story that can definitely add color to the overall adventure and experience. So, I'm sort of, I'm trying to figure out kind of like what my points are, but after kind of listening to that video, just discussing how how hurt they were by this game there, and I'm seeing kind of like a similar sentiment, or I've seen a similar sentiment with other people as well, how just that it seems that there is just like a disregard for the world that was sort of initially created within Breath of the Wild, the intrigue that had, with whether it was like with related to kind of the Zonai and the ruins and the history of Hyrule and that kind of thing, and how Tears of the Kingdom, rather than kind of subvert your expectations, honestly kind of brought down what might have been a more interesting connection to the rest of the series, but also the connection it has to Breath of the Wild, and how the fact that the director himself, Fujibayashi, he himself noted that the explanation for the Zonai devices no longer existing was like, yeah, no, they just disappeared. I think it is definitely insulting in a lot of ways. I think that can be, it just feels a bit like flagrant and a little callous, to kind of make that kind of comment, especially when, one, they were a very important and integral part of the plot for Breath of the Wild, and the fact that it just seemed like it just seemed that the story and kind of the connection to the first game, it seemed just kind of like a bit of a second, like a second piece to the rest of the game. And that sucks. That does suck. And I think I've expressed that a little while back as well. So I am very sympathetic, and I totally understand why people dislike Tears of the Kingdom, and just the fact that it feels like there was kind of like a bit of an abandonment of the story, and some of the characterizations, and there's a lot of inconsistencies and plot holes, and there's a lot of things that you can definitely point out and being like, this is why I feel that this game is bad. And listen, I definitely, I can see that. I just think that it is, and it's like, okay, the ending is maybe kind of a deus ex machina, whatever. I totally get all of these things. I think that despite all of these issues with the story, and the you can kind of point out the game mechanics, and the depths were very underwhelming. Like I can honestly agree with a lot of those things, but it doesn't take away from my enjoyment of the game and the sense of wonder that I had when I played through it, and just like the heights of like gaming, it just reached like a certain level. There were moments in the game that were so like magical that I had to like I had to like stop at a certain point, just like sit, have just like stand on one of the sky islands and look at just the horizon. I mean, it's just beautiful. Like that you cannot replicate, and I don't intend to. Like that's just not something you can replicate in a game. But just the heights that I had with this game, I think is like enough for it to kind of over, to kind of quell the issues that do exist, really. It's just like the feeling of it, you know what I mean? And I look, I am someone who has in the past looked at things from like a very logical standpoint and been like, the characterization of these characters, it doesn't make sense. There are so many plot holes. These are things that doesn't make sense. Why didn't the character act in a certain way? It would have made more sense. I think I feel like I would have been on that kind of side of things maybe before, and I think I may have been that way with other things recently, but it really just doesn't matter too much for me personally. I don't feel those issues that exist are egregious enough to ruin just the absolute, wonderful times that I did have with the game. I think that as the game went on, sure, maybe those issues became a bit more apparent, and the things that, whether it was like continuing to explore the depths and try to kind of fill out the map and that kind of thing, it definitely did sort of, maybe lessened the experience for me. But those first like 40, 50 hours were some of the best moments that I've had with video games ever. And that I am not gonna that's not something that can really be taken away, regardless of the issues that are clearly there. So it is like kind of, it's really interesting just thinking critically about some of your favorite things. Like I can look at all of my favorite video games and favorite art and see that there are like issues that are there, and there are definite criticisms that exist. That happens with any piece of art. But in the case of Tears of the Kingdom, you know what it is. I think that because there was such like an initial kind of like just positive acclaim, just insane positive acclaim on launch, that there almost had to kind of be this like pendulum kind of shift of there being criticisms of the game in a lot of instances, right? And there had to kind of find some sort of balance, because like after I watched, and the funny thing too is like after I sort of watched and listened to this video, I did start seeing more videos of the kind pop up. There was like another video a while back that I saw, I think it was like honestly last year, regarding the criticisms, and it sort of, goes over some similar things, that this massive 3-hour long video had as well. But I'm definitely seeing more of a sentiment in regards to looking at Tears of the Kingdom and sort of separating it from the rest of the series, and disliking the game kind of mainly, kind of heavily because of the story and the way it sort of developed its characters. So I think that there had to sort of there had to be kind of like a sort of like an equilibrium over the course of time. I think that overall, and it's a little hard to gauge now because I have seen so much, criticism, and I have seen a lot of critical discussions about Tears of the Kingdom lately. So it's sort of like clouding my perspective of the game. I believe overall this game still has a very positive kind of outlook for most players. I think there is just kind of like a bit more of a vocal, you know, portion of the fan base that dislike this game, and that sort of want to have just a more well-rounded story, and a more just a better way of just explaining, explaining out some of the inconsistencies. Also the return to more of a linear style gameplay, and I think that it's just like I think that those people will definitely exist, but I think overall, and I can kind of include myself in maybe the majority, that still really love this game. So I don't know. I am very interested in seeing kind of the legacy of this game and Breath of the Wild moving forward. I think that Tears of the Kingdom definitely kind of left a bit of a sour taste in some people's, kind of palate. And I think that for sort of the Zelda team, for Nintendo, I think the best thing to do really is to kind of move on to something new. And in some instances, I think you can kind of see that with Echoes of Wisdom. There are definitely things that appear to kind of be carried over from Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, in terms of kind of the openness of the game mechanics and the puzzle solving and that sort of thing. And I think that for people who want a more traditional Zelda experience, I have a feeling that you're not really going to get that with Echoes of Wisdom. And that for people who heavily disliked Tears of the Kingdom, I feel like you might also dislike Echoes of Wisdom as well, for kind of the similar issues. For similar issues with kind of the openness, just kind of the open-ended nature of solving puzzles and that kind of thing. We'll see when the game comes out, but it is sort of interesting to think about, how it's going to be received. I've kind of been watching some of the previews here and there, and listening to people's previews of the game who are able to, get sort of like a hands-on impression with Echoes. And I think that it feels like there's definitely going to be that same crowd who just doesn't, care for a lot of the things that Tears of the Kingdom brought to the table. I think that they will most likely dislike it. There's just kind of that feeling. I think that criticism is going to kind of remain. And so we'll see. We'll see. I am very excited for Echoes of Wisdom. It's been a very long time since I've played, kind of a top-down 2D Zelda game. And it's technically not even, we call it 2D, but the characters 3D models, but we still call it like, top-down Zelda game. The last one I played was Link Between Worlds, which was awesome. Part of me, I saw kind of a streamer playing through it, and part of me wants to kind of go back to the game, because I do love that game very much, and just sort of, have like a 2D Zelda experience. But I think I might just save that when I get into Echoes of Wisdom and kind of experience that full on. I think that, that was the last one. I have not played through the Link's Awakening remake, and part of me wants to, but part of me is like, I think I can kind of save that experience for another time. And also the game's the game is never on sale. Like, I could try to maybe get like a used copy somewhere, but I'm okay just kind of, waiting until there's, I can find like a cheaper version. of that game, because I haven't played the original Link's Awakening, so most likely if I do play it, I will play the remake version that came out a few years ago. But yeah, I think that, just looking back, just thinking about the year of, what it's been, and a year after, the release of Tears, and just kind of how it could potentially affect, our view of Echoes of Wisdom, and also just future iterations of Zelda, I think is going to be, something that I'll just be kind of keen on paying attention to. I don't think that they're going to, obviously the success of the last two games, I think, is something that they're very much taking into account. Nintendo is very much taking into account. However, I have this feeling that for the next mainline 3D Zelda game, that there will be like a significant enough shift to where it doesn't feel like it's not going to be kind of set in that Breath of the Wild world. I think it would be, if they did do something similar again, if they did sort of like a trilogy with this year, which I really don't think they're going to do. That just doesn't feel like something that's been ever done. And it just doesn't feel like something Nintendo would do. If that did happen, I think a lot of people, including myself, I think would be a little disappointed, because I think we have seen enough of the world. We have seen enough of these worlds where it's like, okay, I think it's time for something new. I think it's time to try something a little different. Maybe sort of kind of go back to some of the series roots with the 3D games, and maybe have a bit more of a linear experience in some instances, right? I do think that it is going to be difficult to sort of shake off sort of like the sandbox aspect of the games of, the Breath of the Wild series, because that is like a big reason to why this game garnered such massive success, right? I think that it is going to be difficult to sort of, are you going to be able to convert those players, like the more casual players really, to becoming, fans of the series overall? Because, players look for different things. I think for the more just kind of, the more kind of casual, just sort of the more mainstream audience, if you want to call it that, they are not looking for things that the more critical crowd is looking for. Like, there's a clear kind of, like I said, there is like a divide between what those types of players want. I think that it is going to be very difficult to kind of try, if the direction is what, I do kind of lean towards, in some instances, wanting to see a bit more of a linear experience with the Zelda games, because I think that I've sort of been satiated with what we already have with the Switch titles. But I think it is going to be maybe a little difficult to try to bridge the gap between kind of casual play with the more open-ended nature of whether it's like solving puzzles or creating vehicles, all that kind of sandbox elements of the titles, and convert the players who are interested in that aspect of the game, and try to get them more on board with the more, self-contained story, linear progression style of past, Zelda games. There's a reason why, and I think this more had to do kind of with fatigue overall with Zelda leading up to it. But with Skyward Sword, that was like not a very, that was not a very successful game. And I mentioned this before, but even with the Switch's, remastered release, that game sold okay, but it didn't sell like something crazy like 30 million copies or even like 7 million copies of Link's Awakening. So there's, and you could point that out to like a number of factors. Okay, maybe Skyward Sword was just not, was just not one of the better, games in the series. Maybe it might be one of the weaker 3D games. And so people who experienced that during the Wii era maybe aren't as interested experiencing it again. And people who experienced it for the first time, whose first game was like Breath of the Wild, maybe were feeling a little unimpressed with it, and they just couldn't be. It's a pretty stark comparison and contrast between Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild. Like the leap from that is it is really crazy. So to kind of go back into especially in the case of Skyward Sword, which is by far the most linear of the 3D games, I think is a little difficult to do that, and it really kind of restricts a lot of player freedom in a lot of instances. So my kind of want, I think, is to somehow bridge that gap and find a way to really get to kind of the essence of what made the original 3D Zelda games so great, which is really, a concentrated story, a very focused narrative in a lot of instances where it's not, again, not like a crazy story, but it's focused. It has like a clear idea of what the trajectory and what the narrative's gonna end up looking like, instead of with the Switch games where the story is kind of sporadic. You sort of progress the story at your own pace because you're off you're off making like a turbine engine somewhere else, right? So it's are you able to kind of bridge that gap between the insane kind of sandbox nature of the games with some of the more traditional roots of dungeons, of a story where there is like a where you have where kind of where the story is going in a lot of instances. And it might be difficult, man. It might be kind of difficult. Breath of the Wild was that departure, obviously, right? And it was the departure from what was before with the linear storytelling. And I think Tears of the Kingdom in some ways was kind of what I'm talking about. It was sort of trying to be kind of that connector, kind of the compromise between narrative and sort of the open-ended kind of gameplay, and the open world nature of the game. And again, like I said, I personally don't have too many qualms, but I recognize that it didn't maybe execute that in the best way possible, especially on the story front. With kind of the way that it was set up, you experience kind of the narrative of the story. You can potentially experience the narrative of the story out of order when it comes to kind of the memories, cutscenes in this game. And that's not... That makes no sense. that I can clearly see that being an issue. And there are a lot of things you can point out with the story being pretty subpar in a lot of instances, right? But I think that it was sort of an attempt by the developers to try to make a bit more of a compelling story, and then in some cases it did. I think sort of the Zelda's sort of her kind of, the actions she took in the game, I think were, pretty, well captured and well established in the story. I think the ending of the game is incredible. So those sort of moments, I think, that do exist, can maybe, you can maybe point to and say like, hey, this was sort of their attempt at creating a more cohesive story. but I think that it didn't succeed very well, perfectly on that front. So what would be the next step, really? I am really interested to see. I'm interested to see, obviously, what Echoes of Wisdom does. My feeling is that this game will follow along a bit more of a linear path, with kind of along the lines of like a traditional Zelda. Obviously, kind of with the top down Zelda games, it's a lot. It's a lot more. It's a lot easier to kind of contain those stories, because it's less of like an open world. Again, we'll see how, what they present with the world in this game, if it's going to be more open world and that kind of thing. But my expectation, my sort of, obviously I don't want to get too high in expectations, but part of my expectations is that it will be more closely resembling something along the lines of like Link Between Worlds. Or in that game, you could sort of decide, which dungeons you could start off with. You can decide which types of weapons you can bring with you to those dungeons, and, where you want to go in the overworld. So I think that it's going to be closer to that, that style of game. And I'm looking forward to it, because, again, Link Between Worlds is an awesome game. It's an incredible game. So, but like in I don't know how much of the top down games, how much of that is going to translate to the next 3D installment. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, I do think that there will be significant changes for sure in some instances, but because this sort of formula has been so successful with the Switch games, it's like, okay, can we continue to kind of use that and just continue to kind of build upon that, and see that there is still, a lot of people still, just enjoy that type of game. I would like to see a change, and I would like to see if they can really try to make a better compromise between that, or not even a compromise really, but just like just have a different focus. Not necessarily, don't take away the adventure and the exploration aspect of the game, but maybe try to just lessen the openness of the game. I think we've kind of sort of, at least personally, I've had my fill, and I'm okay with taking a departure from that. We still have the Switch games. If I ever wanted to kind of go back to the more open-ended nature of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I can always just go back to them. In the same way that I can always go back. Well, technically no, because I don't have those games. Like, I don't really have Wind Waker right now. I'm still waiting on the remake for that. But, I can, technically go back to those older Zelda games if I wanted to have a more linear story. But I think it would be good to see some evolution, and continue, build off of what works in some instances, but understand that there are things that can still be done much better. And I think that there is sort of, I'm sort of bouncing back and forth between, are they going to stick to what they currently have with their formula, or are they going to try to shift? I do really believe that they're going to change some instances. I am hopeful for that. I think there is going to be fatigue for sure between now and, the next release. I think if it does end up being something similar to what Tears of the Kingdom was, I think that, I don't think I'm going to be the only one who's like, okay, maybe I don't really need this. And you also saw, like, Tears of the Kingdom wasn't as successful as Breath of the Wild. I think that the discourse with Breath of the Wild has continued to become longer standing than Tears of the Kingdom, because you've kind of done everything that you wanted to do And when you've seen the clips of the ridiculous creations that were being made, whether it was like reposted from Twitter or TikTok or that kind of thing of just the strapping rockets to the Koroks, like that kind of thing, you sort of you've kind of done, and you've sort of experienced it, and you've seen someone else already do it. So it's like, you could replicate it yourself, but it just won't be as funny as the first time seeing it. You could go through the effort of, and I talked about this, how it's like, okay, my goal of mine is that I'm going to make a giant mech, but it's like, seeing other people do all that, put in the time to create those things, I'm already like, okay, I think I know what it's going to look like. And I think that creating those things on my own isn't going to really give me as much satisfaction as I think it is. So I think that it's there's going to be a shift, and I think more people than you think are gonna want something new. That's just kind of the reality of it, right? People got tired of Skyward Sword. People got tired of that kind of style of game. Dramatic shift to Breath of the Wild. I don't think it's going to be as dramatic of a change from Tears of the Kingdom to the next release, but I think it will be different. I really do. I hope so. I hope there is going to be a bit of a change, but regardless of all that, we got Echoes of Wisdom, and I'm very. I can't stop saying this because it's just a brand new Zelda. I was not expecting this at all this year. This is gonna be like, no, it's gonna be a down year. Probably not gonna get anything too crazy. No, we got a new Zelda game, and it's gonna be out in a couple of weeks, and I'm hoping that I can find the time to play it. I'm hoping that I can really try to sink my teeth into it when it does release, and have a bit of a weekend to kind of play through it as well. Let's talk about some other stuff that came up this week. So I talked about, on Monday, I talked about the PS5 Pro announcement. That was before, the kind of the official video came out. And I think I was kind of correct on some fronts about the that console, about it being expensive. I think I said ballpark no less than $600, and I was right. It was $700 for $700 US, and even more expensive in other regions of the world. That's it's it is. I was like, you know what? Maybe this presentation will sort of potentially prove me wrong in some instances. It's like, oh yeah, no, there are actually things that you can play with your PlayStation, and there are things that is worthwhile to get a PlayStation 4. And I'm not saying that the games that do exist, you can't play them, but I'm just like saying, like, there was no real strong argument as to why I would need to buy a PlayStation 5. Obviously, I'm not getting it, but even that, I'm like, it's like, I look at it, I'm like, dude, I could just get a PlayStation 4. Really, the games that they showcased on there, there were some new games for sure. Spider-Man, and God of War, I think, Need for Speed, but it's like, dude, a lot of these were PlayStation 4 titles. Last of Us, I think there were some other ones as well, but it just was like, it further kind of proved my point about the fact for this sort of generation that there's just kind of this lack of, console exclusives for PlayStation. That's not even, that sort of doesn't really make it worthwhile. Again, I talked about this last week as well, about Astrobot and its release and how successful it appears to be. That might be something where it might convince me to eventually get a PlayStation 5, but it just is not. It is just not enough right now. With the PlayStation 5 Pro, I think it is pretty obvious that who this is sort of appealing to. This is appealing to kind of the people who care about their tech being to the, the most newest tech and that kind of thing, and who are also Sony fanatics. I am curious how this will sell. Part of me thinks that people are still going to buy it. There's just like a weird market for it, where there are people who kind of care about this kind of thing, who care about just the most incremental upgrade and it's, you know what, it's fine. It's not that crazy. It's just, people can have what they want and stuff, but it is. Can I also make fun of them a little bit too, because of just how ridiculous it is? And I don't know. It's just kind of crazy to see that price, and then on top of that, it being digital only, when you have to get the disc drive separately. It's like, dude, what? Then it's going to be like $800 if you do it. If you do get kind of the full, the full set. It's a little ridiculous, right? I did make the comparison earlier this week in regards to, how, some of us do buy more expensive tech, whether it's the newest iPhone or whether it's like maybe a gaming PC and that kind of thing. I'm not someone who really does that. I buy, I always buy my phones used. But if you look at those products, it's like you could kind of justify you sort of purchasing those things if it is like the most highest, the newest iPhone or whatever. And again, I am not the biggest fan. I would never really buy a new phone on release. I think that's a little ridiculous. But you could kind of justify getting it because, one, you use your phone every day. You use it for a lot of things. It is a mini computer in your hand that can do almost everything, right? So it's like the just the convenience factor, just the fact that it has the utility. People need their phones to do anything nowadays. So I understand that, you place a lot of importance on the device. So you can kind of justify, paying a bit more for something like a phone. In the case of like a gaming PC, you can make the same argument. It's like, not only can you play games on it, and then I know that the title gaming PC is maybe a little, contradictory. It's like, okay, so you're willing to spend more than $1,000 for a gaming PC, but you're not willing to spend that for like a console. The PlayStation 5 doesn't. You do it for one thing. You play games, and that's it. Like, there's no other function really. I think maybe with like the disc player, you could watch movies, and maybe you have the ability to download a streaming app on there. But it's like the primary purpose of it is to play games. That's really the main function. PC, like, you can do whatever. You can use it for many, many other things. So there's the utility of this system that costs $700+ is very low, and it just serves as kind of a little trophy for someone who wants it and can be like, hey, check this out. Look how nice the graphics. It's one of those instances. Again, I'm reiterating what I said earlier, but it is the sort of the cost of diminishing returns you just don't see. And I know a lot of people, that watched that presentation from earlier this week were like, you're watching kind of a filtered and, kind of low, just like a compressed YouTube video, but I'm still on the boat. It's like, okay, I just am not someone who cares about that kind of thing. I care about how well a game runs for sure, like performance wise, but just the fidelity and the graphical aspect of it is like it is kind of low on my tier of things that I really care about. Maybe I am someone who has become, maybe I've become too accustomed to my systems and low powered systems of whether it's like a Switch or a 3DS or whatever Nintendo products that I've had in the past. But it is not the most important part for me. Of course, it is important to see how well a game runs, and I think there are definitely a lot of issues with the Switch and the ports that it's had in the past where the game just does not run properly on the system, and I think that is that will continue to be a valid criticism of the system until the new Switch 2 comes out. But the main thing is, once again, the games and whether I can play them. If it looks fine, it looks fine. If there's like a few drops in frame rates, that's okay. If it doesn't look like the prettiest game, it's fine. So it's just like there's just such like an intense focus of whether it's like Xbox or Sony to create the most, just this highest fidelity system, and it's like this has been going on for forever nowadays, right? And it's like I really can't. These look very similar to what games looked like 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, these looked really good. Like the original Last of Us still looks really good. And I was like, I was very confused about it being remastered. I'm like, why? Why does it need to be remastered? It looks great. So it just, I don't know. I will continue to kind of be in the camp of someone who just doesn't place as much weight onto those kinds of things. If there are people out there who appreciate it more, I think it's fine, and I think it is sort of interesting to engage and listen to people that have more of an interest in those aspects and who have a bit more knowledge in those kinds of things. I think that for the Switch, the Switch successor, I think that obviously having higher, just better graphics and better performance overall is going to be a big aspect of why you would want to purchase a Switch successor, but again, it is not going to be the main focus for me. It is going to be the games that exist on those platforms. So anyways, that's kind of my spiel. Really just wanted to kind of talk about and give a little bit of a, I don't know if retrospective is the right word, but just kind of looking back a little bit on, a year plus after Tears of the Kingdom, and now that we're kind of going into, the release of Echoes of Wisdom. I think it is interesting to look back and see what that game's release had and kind of the impact of that game will have for this upcoming game, and then also for future titles as well. I think that it will be, I'm just going to be keeping my eyes peeled on, what the next thing is going to be, but I will be looking forward to Echoes of Wisdom and talking about that very soon. I want that game in my hands like right now. But yeah, I think that's probably going to do it for this week. I was maybe going to do another recording this weekend, but I don't think I'm going to have the time for that. But I was happy to kind of get out and talk more stuff, because I had a good amount of stuff on in my head that I wanted to get out. Anyways, thanks for listening as always. This has been Save the Semantics, signing off.